All right. Wow. Okay. I'm waiting somebody to rappel in right now with that theme music. Wow. Thank you for that. It's great to be back with so many colleagues who I've been able to either serve with or work with in the past. And thank you for this conference and the work that you do in keeping the importance of security, not only here in Canada but also internationally at the top of mind for Canadians, and it's a very, very important one. But before I begin, I want to acknowledge that we are gathered here on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. And I also want to take this opportunity to wish everyone a happy International Women's Day as well. Yeah. So it's, as I said, it's great to be with so many great leaders in this room, and I know many of you had just immense experience and will be contributing to a very thoughtful discussions. Now, as you know that as colleagues, your academics, your industry leaders, and also as members of the Canadian Armed Forces, you know this topic of emergency preparedness extremely well. You've been responding and dealing with disasters a long time ago. I remember first time when the first disaster I deployed to was the Winnipeg floods way back just before, actually we were on workup training to go to Bosnia back then in 97 at that time. So, something that, you have a lot of experience in, and we're going to need that experience. And even though, our time that we had before, things have accelerated quite quickly, and we're going to need to adjust. So it's a privilege for me to be back here with all of you today, and as some of you, last I think I spoke was when I was Minister of National Defence, and I've had a number of portfolios even since then. And a lot has happened. We've had a pandemic, right? And we didn't anticipate something significant like that happening, but it did, and you responded. But I'm here to discuss to you today about the severe and unrelenting impacts of climate change that it's having on Canadians, and to address the things that the Government of Canada is doing to innovate and to prepare Canadians to adapt for the future that we now face as a country. Climate change is a very real security threat to all of us, and denying its existence is dangerous, and denial should never be an option for anyone. It is a fact that Canada is warming on average, get this, Canada is warming on average twice as quickly as the rest of the world. And in our north, it is about 3 times as fast. The warming of our Earth has enormous and dangerous consequences for our people and for people all over the world. It is our job as leaders in government, security, politics, to grapple with this phenomenon. Now, turning away is foolish. Convincing others to turn away is extremely dangerous. Climate security is something that's real, it's something that the former Secretary of Defense, Jim Mattis, and I used to talk quite a bit about, because as you know, when there's drought leads to hunger, and hunger leads to conflict. And we have seen this in many places around the world. So that's why something that I think the defense community was realizing a long time ago, the implications of climate change that was having on the global conflict situations. And now it's almost been close to a year since I became Minister of Emergency Preparedness. And I would say that when I was sworn in, I pretty much went directly into dealing with some of the disasters, and especially the wildfires. We had just started with floods that were just wrapping up and launched into the wildfire season, and we're one disaster after another that we dealt with. But I also had the opportunity to talk to Canadians, local and also provincial governments, and especially Indigenous leaders and civil society. And I wanted to learn from the experience to better inform the way we're going to deal with one of the biggest challenge of our time. So I'll give you an example. I was talking to Newfoundlanders while standing on the coast of Port-au-Basque who had their homes swept away into the ocean during Hurricane Fiona. I met with community members from the Northwest Territories who lost everything and who had to flee their homes to safety for safety during the last season's historical wildfire season. In some places, the same community that was hit with floods got hit with wildfires as well. So local and provincial government leaders are dealing with the fires that's closest to them, and while they need to prepare for the next one. And civil society organizations like the Red Cross, who are doing everything they can to bolster support for Canadians during a crisis. And you need to look no further than the numbers here in Canada to see the devastating impacts, and it was alluded to just earlier. So last year alone, 18.6 million hectares of our country was burned. And to put that into perspective, I won't use the UK piece. I'll just say that it's three times the size of Nova Scotia, just to put things into perspective. And almost 7 times, it's almost 7 times of the 10-year average of 2.7 million hectares per year. And just last year, an entire capital city was evacuated in the north. And across the country, hundreds of thousands of people were forced to flee their homes for safety. And all of last summer, Canadians found it nearly impossible to avoid smoke from nearby wildfires. And this year in February, Alberta has already announced the wildfire season has already started. That's a month earlier than usual. Climate change does not also discriminate in its impact. It is here, it's all around us, and we must adapt, and we must adapt now. Because the costs to Canadians are skyrocketing every single year, and we have to pay. There is no choice. As the effects of climate change directly impacts more and more people, so has the number of people making insurance claims to replace the homes that they built after a lifetime of hard work. So by 2050, that could translate into more than $40 billion per year. And when provinces and territories exceed their capacity, the request for assistance from the Government of Canada kicks in. So prior to 2020, the Government Operations Centre would coordinate on average about 5 to 12 RFAs per year. Now, between January 2020 and December 2023, the Government Operations Centre has already coordinated over 230 of these requests. So let these numbers sink in just a bit, because they further validate the extreme impact of climate change. Now, in so many of these cases, the members of our Canadian Armed Forces have answered that call, and I want to thank them for this. As all of you do, you are always called upon, whether it's filling sandbags to help prevent flooding, and delivering the critical supplies like vaccines to remote communities, and helping Canadians evacuate in the most dangerous of circumstances. And so, thanks again for everything that you have done on behalf of Canadians. So as we move forward, though, all of us need to get creative and work on ways to increase the support, because this problem can and does cross provincial and territorial borders, and demands a whole of society solution. And from the Government of Canada, we have a robust system in place to provide support to communities. And we have gotten creative to increase and unlock additional resources. For example, PSPC has now faster and provides contracting for essential supplies and coordination. The Canadian Coast Guard plays a pivotal role and has contributed personnel and specialized equipment. Parks Canada has also stepped in and has sent everything from wildfire management specialists trained to manage the most complex wildfires, and most recently, even snow removal equipment. ISAD plays a very important role in keeping the telecommunication services active to ensure that people stay connected, especially in the Northwest Territory, where the communication line was cut off and the number of Starlink system that we had to deploy into that region. PHAC, as you know, has played a pivotal role during the pandemic, and it's engaged in its National Emergency Strategic Stockpile to ship life-saving supplies. And also Indigenous Services Canada plays a pivotal role and has contributed funding to support the response and recovery efforts for impacted First Nations communities. And on top of that, we're also working to coordinate and enhance cooperation with our provincial and territorial partners to keep Canadians safe. We know that we need to do more, and we will, and we are. And that is why just last month I convened my counterparts from across Canada and also the national Indigenous leaders in Ottawa to talk about the future. There we received a sobering briefing about the forecast for this summer. I will say that not only do conditions favor a summer like last year, but we could be looking at a far worse outcome. And that being said, I'm still inspired and hopeful because of what we learned last year. Also, each of us here in this room has unique expertise and solutions to this very complex problem. There's an opportunity to seize the moment and to build a greater resilience for future emergencies. So far together, we have implemented the emergency management strategy for Canada toward a resilient 2030 that will significantly strengthen our ability to prepare and also recover from disasters. We're also working closely with civil society organizations to build a dependable civilian humanitarian workforce that can provide surge capacity in response to large-scale emergencies. And most recently, the review of our Disaster Financial Assistance Arrangement Program has been undertaken to ensure that Canadians get the support that they need and when they need it. And keep in mind, the DFAA was actually created in the 1970s. The new modernized DFAA is set to be shared with the provinces and territories soon and will focus more on mitigating the rising disaster risk and supporting people following disasters and build greater resilience to future threats. And last year, we released the first ever national risk profile, the public report providing Canada's first national snapshot of disaster risk to better inform our decisions. This is a key action under the National Adaptation Strategy, which is our vision to empower communities to adapt in the way that best suits their needs. Because we know that there is not a one-size-fits-all solution here, given the vastness and uniqueness of our country. And we'll continue to work together with all partners on combating the effects of climate change and improving our response. So continuing this engagement is my top priority. And I want to thank all of you who are here today, who are working to help save lives. You are the people that Canadians rely on and when disasters strike. And for that, once again, I want to thank you. So I know that together we will get this right, because this is the biggest challenge of our generation. And we owe it to our kids and those who will come along after us to build a more safer, more resilient, and sustainable Canada. So once again, thank you for having me here today. We have a lot of work to do, and we're going to have a pretty busy season as well. So thank you very much, everyone, for having me here today, and I'll open it up to questions, I think. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sajjan, for this very informative and also sobering talk. In the data you shared with us, it illustrates that our ultimate asset, the Canadian Armed Forces, have been used exponentially in the last couple of years. And to a certain degree, it illustrates the limits of our actual societal capabilities. And if, as we anticipate, the hazards with climate change and all other type of hazards keep on increasing, the pressures on the Canadian Armed Forces will become unsustainable compared to their primary task. Now, what levers, how do you anticipate stimulating this societal response capacity so that the ultimate resource really remain an ultimate resource?
No, it's a great question, and I would say that when it comes to Canadian Armed Forces response, it's something that I would say that kind of responsible for as well, because when we created our defense policy, for obviously a very good reason, we needed to make sure that the Canadian Armed Forces was able to respond to domestic disasters. It's something that Canadians also wanted, and so we need to make sure the capabilities was there, and the structure was created around that. But as the world changes and the impacts of climate change has significantly increased, so does demands on our Canadian Armed Forces, especially when it comes to international operations. I know that our reserves are also supporting the regular force. So the territorial battalion groups that were originally set up and some of the reserve units that had the light urban search and rescue task and so forth, they're busy doing also very other important things. Plus, it's also important for Canadians to know when the Canadian Armed Forces arrive, yes, they bring confidence, they bring an amazing system in place, but they're actually not the best resource to deploy to some of those disasters. If you just take wildfires as an example alone, they do amazing work. The IRUs that are set up, one thing to remember we changed was they get trained when you're set up as an IRU, they already get the level 3 wildfire training, or when it comes to floods before they deploy, so there is no delay in response. But level 3 is not what's needed. It's level 2 and level 1 wildfire response that's needed. So that's what we're looking at now, is making sure that we build a proper response force. So we're talking to many different organizations of how we can increase the level 2 response. But let's not also forget, we're also increasing our firefighting capabilities. We're looking at how we can have more civil society involved through our humanitarian workforce concept. Many different organizations are part of it now, and your organizations are doing just amazing work with that. We're also have reached out to Team Rubicon, and during the snowstorm, they have done amazing things. So what I would say is, because the increase in disasters where we didn't anticipate that the Canadian Armed Forces being called upon, we've had to make the adjustments now. So what I would say is, if the Canadian Armed Forces are going to be needed, we need to be the last resort, but at the same time though, we need to make sure that we have the right capability. So it's not just about not calling the Canadian Armed Forces. What we're trying to do is actually build up the right response. And if that response is overwhelmed, then we only want to call the Canadian Armed Forces.
Yeah, thank you. And how could we motivate, stimulate this response capacity at the provincial and local level, understanding that there's already efforts and levers that are used to increase the federal response among all your colleagues from various federal departments. There remain a challenge at the provincial level and territorial level to build that capacity. Any insights that emerged from your last week's meeting with your colleagues?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think every province and territory is looking at what they need to do, to what type of response they need to provide. And what I would say is sometimes when there's a massive disaster, people look to the federal government, especially because you have the Canadian Armed Forces there who are able to respond. But one of the things we also know is when there's any disaster, we need to make sure, and I've said this very clearly from last year, is we need to make sure we have the right response at the right place at the right time. That's how you're going to actually either prevent or reduce the impact of whatever disaster is taking place. So are the provinces, some provinces are already increasing their capacity to respond, because it's no use holding a certain resource that's actually needed at the local level. So I'll give you an example. One of the key focus that I'm focused on right now is any resource that we look at, I want to have it at the lowest level. At the local level first, where they have the ability to assess, analyze, and get that immediate response to that's needed, whether it's a flood, prevent it, or if there's a fire, identify it and get the right response to put it out. And if there's an evacuation, how do you support Canadians during that time? Then you have immediately the provincial response. And each one has to be understood right from the get-go. And I think from the military side, you understand from your operations center is you want to go 2 levels down to understand. So having situational awareness 2 levels down, so that way you understand exactly what is going on, and you have the other resource that might be needed stacked and ready to go. So that's what we have been working on. So that way when a response is needed, there is no delay in a request. It's literally ready to respond. So and when we talk about what type of resources are needed, we have to analyze where it needs to go. And that's what we're kind of focused on now. The immediate response from last year is not to build up, we are looking at building up federally, but our first priority is pushing any resources down to the local level, then at the provincial level, while we build up what type of capabilities are going to be needed at a federal level. And I can go on for a while because it's not just about the human resource, we also have to look at the technology, some of the wildfire capabilities, some of the new technologies we're looking at. I actually just met a company in BC who's looking at using drone technology and swarming technology to be able to fight wildfires. Plus, we need to get better at predicting. And I'll give you an example. We always talk about the response side of things. But just imagine if we can detect a wildfire faster and put it out sooner, you can actually prevent the entire disaster. And in the case of Hay River last year in Northwest Territories, there was a wildfire that was taking place. It was going on for about 2 weeks. But they didn't anticipate the wind pattern changing because it's never kind of blown in a certain way. All of a sudden it shifted and the wind pattern was so severe that the entire town was put at risk and we had a massive disaster. Well, just imagine if we can detect and put that fire out even faster, you just prevented that entire disaster from taking place.
Thank you. To a certain degree, what you shared with us as the ultimate resource of the Canadian Armed Forces and the financial agreements post-disasters, to me is kind of revealing, on one hand, that the federal government is assuming fully its responsibility, and that those responsibilities are fulfilled in a very effective manner, but to the other extent, it might actually generate some addiction. Provinces and territories become very satisfied and rely to a certain degree heavily on the federal response, either during and even after. And on this issue of after the fact, understanding the steep increase of the DFA funds over the last years, any idea on how to lever that beyond the resiliency or the mitigation actions? Any thoughts? And one of them, and I'm just referring to conversations that happened in Canada over the last couple of years, what about the idea of connecting the DFA agreement with a national investigative body? So every time there is a disaster that deserves those millions of dollars of DFA, we investigate the event as we do for a plane crash to understand the root cause and reinvest better so we don't experience the same type of disasters as we've seen happening in the last couple of decades.
And to be honest, when you say that, it's actually common sense. But the DFA was created in the 1970s and was not set up in this manner. It was there if something bad was to happen, and it happened infrequently at that time, that the federal government would come in and cover up to 90% of the cost. But it can only fix what is broken and not look at mitigating. So there would be, I was speaking with mayors and said, listen, rather than fixing this, but if we did this, we could prevent it from future years, but the DFA didn't allow for that. So that's the modernization that's currently taking place. Well, we will have the option to do so. So there's a number of things that I don't want to get ahead of myself right now because I'll get in trouble for sharing some of that work, and the province would be upset that I shared it too soon. But no, so all those things are taken into account. And just want to also touch up on, again, back to the Canadian Armed Forces. One is, last thing you want to do is put the Canadian Armed Forces in a position where you deploy it and then they have nothing to do. And I've seen this from the beginning when I was Minister of National Defence, responding to disasters, and before the Prime Minister created his portfolio under Minister Blair, was that when we deployed, for example, helicopter support, at times you need to get that support very quickly because it's only our pilots that fly at night. And evacuation was a real concern. So those are high-level resources that need to be deployed very quickly for saving Canadians. But at the same time, so are certain helicopters, because they don't fight wildfires, and Air Force make a decision based on for a very good reason, then they end up sitting around for the longest time. So we need to be able to be very nimble on why they're being asked. So the provinces has gotten relied on the Canadian Armed Forces because they bring the sense of common. But this is where I can assure you that I've had a number of conversations, and the snowstorm was a perfect example of this, saying no, we're not asking for the Canadian Armed Forces because just the time and space for them to respond, you're not going to get the support that you actually need. Here you have resources right here ready to go. And the same things we're going to be looking from the wildfires. One, we have about 500 firefighters trained more than we had previously. We got about close to 150 Indigenous wildfire folks who have also been trained. Additional equipment has also been provided through, I forget which program, through NRCan. So all that is being built up. Again, all the resources are being pushed down to the local level as we look at a model that's going to work at a national level. And what I want here is a force that can be readily available at the local level, but utilized federally. And what I will say, we are looking at different models. It's very easy to say, look at FEMA. As a member of the former Heavy Urban Search and Rescue team, I've been trained by FEMA. FEMA is a great organization, but it's set up for the U.S. May not be perfectly for us, and I can tell you that the modeling exactly will not work for us. We would have to make adjustments. We're also going to be looking at the German model. We've been working on, by the way, very closely with Australia on their wildfire season. They've looked at how we do predictive models. They've taken that, put it into a digital form, and now we're utilizing what they're actually doing. So we're sharing a lot of this various knowledge. But as we look at floods and wildfires, we have to be ready for earthquakes. Yes. So we have our heavy urban search and rescue teams, right? We need a greater light urban search and rescue capability that's going to be built in as well. Then we have those other what ifs we need to be very mindful of. For example, tsunamis. An earthquake on the other side of the Pacific can have devastating impacts to our coast as well, like it's had in the past. And let's not forget pandemics and other emergencies. So what we're looking at here is, yes, we're ready for what happens every single year, but then we also need to be mindful, what are those what-if scenarios? And if anybody ever says to me again, well, what's the likelihood of that happening? I think we can take that out of our vocabulary now, right? Given what is taking place here in Canada and internationally. And we haven't even talked about international disasters, what's taking place around the world as well.
Yeah. We could sit here, I guess, and have this interesting conversation for a long while. We might have time for one question from the participants here. Emergency preparedness is not just about climate crises, it's about civil society resilience to a wide array of shocks. Canadian civil society resilience seems to be on a downward trend compared to other countries such as Finland and Latvia. What is the government of Canada doing to reverse this trend?
I would say first one is there have been provincial programs in place, federally as well. We have emergency management or preparedness week that takes place in May. I know as a member of parliament, I used to put something on, but it wasn't taken as seriously. In British Columbia, earthquakes was taken seriously, and there was a lot of work that was done. And I would say that the last year has really opened everybody's eyes on the responsibility, not at just at a provincial level, but right down to the municipal level. So some of the things that we're going to be looking at is what I'd like to see the provinces do, working with the municipalities. If any new town council or city council gets formed, to get trained on the incident command system or whatever system that they want. Have an emergency plan in place. One of the things that I also found is what takes so much time is if each doesn't know what each is doing, there's a huge time lag in if a resource is deployed. How do you deploy it? It needs to be a plug-and-play model that we're all can get better at. Plus, there's a responsibility for Canadians. And here as a minister, when I was Minister of Defense, I used to talk about boots a lot, right? And down at that level. So now, as Minister of Emergency Preparedness, I talk about patio furniture. Sounds ridiculous. This is the number one thing that I learned from the firefighters that I went across. That when they go out into neighborhoods and trying to prevent a fire, the first thing that they do is moving patio furniture. Because what they find is that the patio furniture, people, want to sit outside, they leave it out at a certain area, where the catches on fire. Well, patio furniture, for the most part, either burns hotter and longer, and that's what eventually, so even if the fire resistance they put on the house catches on fire. And when a house catches on fire, the embers are about 100 times more than from trees themselves. And that, just imagine now what it creates after that. So just a simple thing of building resiliency for Canadians to understand that will go a long way. Plus the whole thing about Fire Smart for individual Canadians, but also for municipalities. And here's something that I also learned. I thought Fire Smart was strictly about having a little gap between for fires. No, it's actually about looking at the right vegetation. What type of trimming? Yes, take the fuel source away. And I saw very drastically, first when the disaster was taking place, which areas of West Kelowna had a Fire Smart program and the neighborhoods were saved, and which areas weren't. But when I visited afterwards, what was the actual real devastation was the vegetation where there was a Fire Smart had already started to come back. In the other areas where there was no Fire Smart, the earth was literally scorched about 4 to 5 feet deep. So that soil was damaged, they said, for about 100 years. So now imagine the impact that's going to have on people. So now when there's this heavy rainfall, the mudslides that can actually occur. So Fire Smart and the resiliency piece for Canadians and towns is going to be extremely important on the prevention. And what I would say is we talk about the response, but my main priority is prevention. We have to be ready for a response. And the third one, we have to also do recovery well. So if there is a disaster, we want to make sure that Canadians are served well. So we're working on all three. So as we were now getting ready for the response side of things, we need to be focused on recovery. And as we were finishing up recovery, we were very focused on the prevention piece. And every single year, as we do better response, we need to get better and better at prevention. So even though the impacts of climate change will always be there, our ability to deal with it and prevent it, hopefully, is going to get better and better.
Thank you. So now, I guess with the audience we will have a significant, bigger impact on EP Week next May.
Yes, absolutely. I'm counting on it. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate it. There. Okay. There we go. And thanks for all your work. Okay.
Thank you so much, Minister.
Thank you.